Great, thank you. So, welcome to today's program by the Northern Virginia Democratic Black Caucus. I am Russell Brooks, chair of the NVDBC. If you are unfamiliar with our organization, it is a coalition composed of the Black caucuses in the Democratic committees within Fairfax, Arlington, Loudoun, and Prince William counties, as well as the city of Alexandria. My colleagues representing those jurisdictions are also with us today. What have we done so far? We were co-sponsors of a debate among the Democratic primary candidates for lieutenant governor that took place in Prince William, and we organized a community forum on HR 1, aka the Big Ugly Bill, that took place in Fairfax. The forum analyzed the impact the bill will have on Virginians, especially disadvantaged people in the Commonwealth, and featured a journalist, a representative from the Center for American Progress, and elected officials. We also worked to support George Stewart's successful campaign to join the Prince William Board of Supervisors. We are pleased with what we have done so far, but there is much more that we can do to increase the influence of African Americans throughout our region. Today's program represents the start of a monthly speaker series that we will hold on issues of interest to our constituencies. We are privileged to have Lauren Burke, an experienced journalist and the founder of Black Virginia News, to help us kick off this initiative. We have asked her to speak about the recent elections and what should form the Black agenda next year, when Virginia will have a new governor and an expanded Democratic majority in the House of Delegates. After her remarks, my co-moderator, Alfred Woolen, will have some questions for Lauren, and she will ask as many of your questions, the audience, as time will allow. Please place your questions in the chat, and we will get to as many as possible. Now, welcome, Lauren. You have the floor.
Russell, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. Alpha, I really appreciate that social media ad. That was great. Really appreciate that. Appreciate everybody being here. I see Karen and D Carter, DD Carter. Uh, you know, I'll start off by saying that I'm Lauren Burke. I started Black Virginia News in 2022. I've worked for four members of Congress and our lieutenant governor. My last political job was for Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, who I'm proud to have worked for. Uh, I believe he got completely railroaded, but that'll be in the book. And I have worked in politics and in media. I worked for ABC News and USA Today and the Hill newspaper. Worked for a few little startups, Politics 365, a few little things, but media and politics. And it's been interesting to see the changes on both. I don't need to tell anybody in here that we are living in an age of misinformation and disinformation. It's greatly impacting our community. I don't need to tell anybody in this Zoom that we have a situation where we have the federal government attacking the Black community like we haven't seen since the end of the Civil War. It's really the second period of the Redeemers and that period where we had the Black codes happen in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It is a concerted attack. The Republican Party of old, of Ronald Reagan, of Richard Nixon, of Barry Goldwater is gone. It is replaced by a openly white supremacist regime led by Donald Trump and Stephen Miller, and several others, including an Afrikaner from South Africa, who is a well-known racist and eugenicist. These people are in charge of our government right now, of the federal government, and we have to be very focused and very candid about what that means for us. And that means that we have to put a lot more energy into public policy than we normally would. The good news is that in Virginia, there's a historic situation with regard to Black power in Virginia. We have more Black power in Virginia than we've ever had. And I haven't researched this. I graduated from American University in history, and one of my professors was Julian Bond, who he was doing an adjunct class at the time at American University. I got really lucky and had him as a teacher. It effectively was the teaching of Eyes on the Prize. So if you saw Eyes on the Prize, that was what the class was. At any rate, we have a situation in Virginia. We have more Black people in charge of stuff than at any other time in history of Virginia. We have the Speaker of the House, Don Scott. We have the Chair of Appropriations, Louise Lucas. We have the Chair of Budget Appropriations. They call it something different in the House, and Luke Torian. We have Bobby Scott moving millions of dollars quietly from his perch on the federal level as chair, and then at times when he was in the minority to HBCUs as the chair, and now he is the senior ranking member. He might become the chair again of House Education and Workforce. We're going to have the first Black Attorney General come in. And obviously, we just got, in the last 4 years, Jennifer McClellan is a member of Congress out of Richmond. So we have a lot of Black power sitting around. And so the question becomes, how is that leveraged into recognizable, tangible results for communities, for Black communities? And you guys have probably maybe seen me a few times on Roland Martin's show. Um, we were very candid about saying and unapologetic about saying that we focus on Black communities. We do not use the word minority. We do not focus on any other groups. We don't, and there's nothing against any of those groups. I'm not against any of the other agendas that sometimes intersect. But I'm not a big fan of the term intersectionality, even though I'm in signal chats with the professor who invented the term. But at any rate, I'm not here to stop anybody else's energy, right? So when I do Black Virginia News, you notice there's not a whole lot of attacks on Black elected officials or calling out Black elected officials. I don't do none of that because the white media does that for us on a regular basis. I don't need to add to that content at all. And so we're going to have a historic situation with the Black Caucus in Virginia of 37 Black members. What I have found in my political experience, which started in the 1990s, my mother is from Emporia. She met my father. I don't know, how did they meet? They met somewhere in New York because my grandmother worked in state politics in Albany, New York. At any rate, my mother worked for a politician in New York, a state assemblyman during the Mario Cuomo era of New York politics. And what I have found in New York on Long Island, there are no Black people in charge of anything. So when I grew up, there were no Black people in charge of anything, no Black elected officials, nothing. This is Long Island. Long Island is very conservative and ethnic, but conservative. A lot of Italian Americans, Irish Americans, et cetera, and so on, but not a big Black community other than Central Islip where I lived, Riverhead and Wyandanch. Okay. So at any rate, what I've learned over time is that Black people who are elected by Black people are a lot more obviously open and interested in hearing about the things that will move the community forward than those who are elected by white folks. There's not that many in Virginia, but up in the Nova area, obviously you have Charnel Herring, you have Adele McClure, and you have a few elected officials who have a lot of white voters to put them into office. And what I've found is, to be candid, that, the folks in Hampton Roads and Richmond are going to be a lot more open to the things that move the needle in our community in terms of agenda setting for the coming session. The coming session is going to be controlled by the Democratic Party. Governor Spanberger and obviously the Senate is controlled by the Democrats, and they almost have a veto-proof majority now, thanks to Don Scott and Dan Helmer, of 64 members. So one of the things that is lacking, and I've noticed the big difference when I grew up as a kid in New York politics and in Virginia politics, is a set agenda, a stated agenda by a Black elected, but not a Black elected, a Black community group or activist group. That is missing in Virginia. I'm not sure why that's missing in Virginia, but it is. I'm friends with Gayleen Kanoit, and I would say this if Gayleen was on this call right now, but I've said it to her and I can say it right now. Part of the problem is there is a conflict of interest with regard to the Democratic Party and the NAACP. You have a actor in the Democratic Party as a official in the NAACP. So what that then results in is not a whole lot of pushing an agenda for the state NAACP. And I think Cozy has been great. I think Cozy's been a lot better than the NAACP president before him, to be candid. But I will just say this, there needs to be an agenda from somebody. It doesn't have to be the NAACP. It can be a community group. It could be a business group. It could be the Black Chamber. It could be a lot of people, but there has to be an agenda for these elected officials to understand what it is that the community wants. And that is missing. And that cannot go missing when you have a almost veto-proof majority and a record amount of Black elected officials sitting around. So that is something that not only the tactics of Black leadership and what goes on in certain moments is discussed generally amongst Black folks, but right now is a crucial moment. And the background of that argument can very easily be that we are under attack by the federal government, and how are you going to protect us, elected officials in Virginia, from that attack? Now, you do see that the federal government hasn't yet pulled what they pulled in Charlotte and now what they're pulling in New Orleans of sending a bunch of ICE agents into, let's say, Richmond to do a bunch of dumb stuff. But I'm not sure why that wouldn't happen, because what Trump is doing is he's targeting Democratic cities and Democratic-led states. So why wouldn't Virginia be on that list? So we got to be, I think, a lot more, there's got to be a lot more pressure put on certain folks about what it is we want and how to get that. The way it works in the General Assembly is you do have to generally pinpoint members to sponsor specific pieces of legislation that you want. You know, there is a procedure for that. I think most of y'all know what it is in terms of, you know, recognizing that this legislator is on this committee for this issue and this is what we want to push. Uh, my personal view is that if it doesn't involve money and community development and SWAM and scaling businesses, it doesn't matter. And this is not me saying that, you know, commemoratives and street renamings and all those things that we do see aren't important. Because I remember when Justin Fairfax was the lieutenant governor, we renamed we renamed the street after Arthur Ashe in Richmond. The Lee statue came down. I'm all good with all of that. I'm just arguing that when you have a moment of this much consolidated Black power, particularly around money, you have the two money committees led by Black folks, Luke Torian and Louise Lucas. That window is not going to be open forever. People need to realize that this is the moment to be asking for big things, particularly when you see the federal government defunding everything that has anything to do with Black money and Black support. So they are doing that systematically, and they're trying to erase history, which, of course, is not just symbolic, it's strategic, because what I believe set this entire moment of backlash into motion was, of course, the presidency of Barack Obama, the progress that he made, the progress that Joe Biden made. They're trying to undo all of that. And of course, they're trying to undo all the civil rights legislation. We shouldn't get shocked when they undo Section 2 and under Section 5 and Section 2, effectively undoing the entire Voting Rights Act. That was the entire point of John Roberts's place on the court. So we need to be just as Black folks in leadership positions need to be just as strong, pushing back as you see the push on us. And in this moment in Virginia, this is the moment to me to be doing all of that. And any talk that y'all hear about waiting, and you should be thinking about what Martin Luther King wrote in the 60s in Letter from a Birmingham jail, when he said that wait almost means never, and white moderates are problematic. All of that is true. It remains true almost 60 and 70 years later. It is the same tactics. So I have nothing against Congresswoman Spanberger, but I did cover her when she was in Congress quite closely. She is a moderate Democrat, right? And there is definitely going to be some moments of frustration with that. I think her team is going to be setting up to run for president in 4 years. And when you set up for run for president, you want to look as moderate and, you know, whatever is possible. At the same time, I do think she might be open to some things we might be surprised at, but there's only one way to find out. So that push for Black leadership is necessary, and a forward agenda is necessary, something in writing. And I wouldn't, you know, wouldn't be shy about that in this moment. And I'll stop there. There's a lot to talk about. I'd take any question on any topic. Feel no discomfort to ask me anything, because I am open to every question. And that's it.
Okay. Russell, do you want me to jump right in or do you want to do a segue?
No, I was going to say thank you, Lauren, but Alpha, no, take it away.
Perfect. I just want to reiterate, if you have any, we do have a set of questions that we want to, that we plan to ask. Lauren, you touched on so many of them, so it fits perfectly. Really excited about these questions. But if any of our listeners, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask or that you'd like Lauren to answer later on, please be sure to put them in the chat. So we'll go ahead and jump right into it. You touched on the Spanberger administration, which is really interesting. We know that some folks have had some concerns about how diverse her administration is going to be, how much is she going to listen to or be open to concerns with the Black community. But to go back to something that you mentioned, how do you think that her incoming administration is going to reflect the diversity of Virginia?
Well, for it to do that, there would have to be 20% of the staff would have to be black, which is unlikely. Okay,
Mhm.
so everyone knew that Marvin Figueroa was going to happen, and I think everybody pretty much knows that Candy King is going to be the Secretary of the Commonwealth. But I will say that to me, it's not so much the number, it is what the results are and what the direction of the policy is. Because you could have all black people, y'all know this. You could have a lot of black folks sitting around and nothing happens, or you could have some rare occasion where somebody white shows up and does a bunch of stuff. You just never know. But you do have to start with an ask. One of the problems I see in our politics is we never ask for anything in an affirmative fashion. So it's not Abigail Spanberger's fault if we're not asking her to do stuff, if we're not telling her, do this, this, and that. When Ralph Northam got in trouble in 2019 and then had the conversion into, I'm going to be progressive and do a bunch of black stuff, he was asked to do things, and he did those things. A lot of what he was asked to do was performative. Some of it was some of it was real policy, don't get me wrong. It wasn't all performative, but I remember one of the things was a statue. It was a statue. What the heck was that thing? I forget. It wasn't Barbara John's. It was something where it was statue, and I'm looking at this ceremony and everybody's crying and this and that. And I'm like, are you guys kidding me? Like, have him do something more that is actually substantive. One of the substantive things he did do was Petersburg, the development in Petersburg. Then Youngkin comes in, becomes friends with the mayor of Petersburg, Sam Parham, and then they continue it. Youngkin did a good job in Petersburg. That was a real tangible thing. You can look at the differences in Petersburg. Petersburg's a very black community. You can see that. The same thing has to happen with Spanberger in terms of people asking. The people asking oftentimes are other elected officials. Now, sometimes it is the public, sometimes it's community groups, sometimes it's activists. But whoever it is, there's got to be an ask and there's got to be a plan. I personally think, and I don't, y'all can push back on me, it's all good. I'm not sensitive about any of this, but I personally think that if it doesn't involve money, community development, building businesses to scale, telling the Black Caucus, the Black Chamber of Commerce, hey, you want to do this or that, moving contracts, if it's not some Maynard Jackson style thing, I'm suspicious. Because what
Mhm.
they typically do with communities of color in Virginia, or Black community in Virginia, is they'll do the thing of hiring one black person and saying, hey, see, we hired one black person. That's great. We got Marvin Figueroa sitting there, Candy King. So that's great. That ain't what it is. This is now a situation with the fundraising that we're into record millions and millions of dollars. And then when you look at the MOU that the candidates sign and the vendors, they're all white. All right, this is something that I've been arguing about with them back and forth forever. We have black elected officials that somehow can't figure out a way to hire a black vendor or help that person build the scale or apprentice somebody. I mean, I will name names. I mean, we do have several black elected officials. It's like, why is your top consultant making $300,000? Somebody white who, by the way, has been on social media saying stupid stuff about black folks. Why are y'all doing that? And if you're going to do that, if you think that person's effective, okay, fine, but at least have a black apprentice sitting there that you're kicking 5,000 to every month. So, Spanberger, back to your question, she just needs to know what it is we want. I don't know that she knows that. I really actually don't know that she knows that. And so when
Mhm.
when officials don't know what to do, they do what everybody else has done. They come into the community, they take pictures with black people, everybody's grinning, we're taking photos, nobody's ever really talking about anything deep, and then we're having an election. I mean, I'm not blaming her for that because I don't see anybody saying to her, this is what we want. It's a different thing if you say to somebody, this is what we want, these three things, and then they don't do it. But for her not to know it all is problematic. That's on us.
So let's jump into, so to that point, let's kind of jump into party politics because we're talking about the Democratic Party, right?
Right.
Black people, for the most part, perceive or want to perceive the Democratic Party as a safe space. And something that I generally say is we can't afford to look at any party or politics in general as a safe space as Black people. We have to be strategic. So one of my questions is, African Americans, we are continually concerned about being taken for granted by the Democratic Party. Is that a valid concern? And what do we
Well,
do about that?
we're trapped right now because the other party is a white supremacist adjacent regime. That's what this is. This is not a choice between George W. Bush and, Gavin Newsom or something like that, or or Joe Biden, and even Richard Nixon had the Job Corps. I mean, you could find some Republican presidents that have done a few things for that were beneficial for the Black community. Right now, we have no choice. So when we have an election, we've had no choice in Virginia for really 3 cycles. Although I think Youngkin is, at the end of the day, a country club Republican. He's not like Greg Abbott or DeSantis, where everything's got to be a big fight all the time. But when Gillespie ran against Ralph Northam, it was, all he talked about was immigration. He effectively was doing what Trump is talking about right now. It's a full-on race baiting campaign. They were trying to make Ralph Northam look like an MS-13 member. None of that made any sense. They're race baiting, right? And so now they kind of skipped that a little bit, but of course, Youngkin did CRT. So that was a race bait in 2021. And now we had, Winsome Sears had really no idea what she was doing one way or the other. But on the federal level, you see a full-on white supremacist regime that is proud and bold and brazen. So Black voters have no choice. That's why you have a plus 16 for Abigail Spanberger. That's why you're going to have a wave election coming up in 2026 for the Democrats, because there is no choice there. We're not like measuring two things that are close. The reason Youngkin won was he ran as a moderate, whether he was or not. The way he ran was, I am a sensible Republican, and I'm not really wanting to get into all this other nonsense. And he pulled that off enough to win. But Black voters have no choice right now. They have to vote Democrat. And that's why it's hard to leverage Democrats. The only leverage we have, which is unlikely to be used, is to say some version of, we're not voting for you if we don't see these things happen. Like if we don't see community development in Portsmouth, by the time your 4 years is up, we're out of here. Like there's no group that is saying that. I mean, you do have the ADOS types online, but they're not really a group that is politically
Right.
organized in Virginia in a way that would be. But
Can you
you
define
still
ADOS for those that might be unfamiliar?
yeah. So ADOS is effectively the folks that are they're arguing that we Black people whose lineage goes back to slavery, directly back to slavery, are the Black people everybody should be listening to. And if you are an immigrant from another country or something like that, Nigeria, whatever it may be, or the islands, you're not really as Black as we are, and we are the ones that should be getting reparations, et cetera, and so on. I get where they're coming from. I don't agree with everything they're saying and the way they move, but I get it. I get what they're doing, because what waters down our politics oftentimes are people from other countries, and we as Black people are looked at as all the same, even though of course we're not. Just like with Hispanic communities, I mean, obviously Cubans are not the same as Mexican Americans, and Nigerians are not the same as folks whose lineage come from the Black American South. Okay, that is a different history. But I will say, as a journalist, I've run into many reporters, you Michelle Sindor, Steve Herndon, they're coming from Haiti. They had a race reporter at the New York Times named John Elegant. His family was from Trinidad. It matters. They have a different view of things, right? Because their families did not go directly back to what our families may have gone back to in Virginia. Okay, so that is that is relevant, but at the same time, when you walk through that door, and this is why I'm not an intersectionality fan, when you walk through that door, you're Black first. Nobody knows anything else about you when you walk through the threshold of that doorway. You might be in the LGBT community, you might be Trinidadian, you might be whatever, but when you walk through the door, our society looks at you as a Black person first, and we need to deal with the fact that from a political standpoint, that matters, and the way we move after that matters.
Absolutely. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the Spanberger campaign because we have some
Right,
good
sure.
questions
Hmm.
in the chat. But then I want to jump into something that you mentioned as far as the importance or the impact of Black people voting for Black elected officials. But Graham, again going back to the Spanberger campaign, says, is there anyone on the Spanberger campaign or on the Spanberger team now who you think can serve as the voice of our community? And if there isn't, how can we inject that voice?
There's some people on the transition team. She's got a few staffers. Ironically, there was a person on the team that, quite frankly, they didn't want on the team. That was probably the best touch person, who was not African American, who was Jake Rubenstein.
Mm.
I'm sort of frenemies with Jake Rubenstein. He worked for Terry McAuliffe. We were at war in 2019 after what happened with Justin Fairfax. So we're frenemies, but we talk. I talk to a lot of people that I have had disagreements with or I don't like because I find that, frankly, the Godfather, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And also, in politics, you do have to deal with people oftentimes that you disagreed with on something huge. You just have to put it away, because it's hard to do it, but you do have to do it. But Jake was put on the campaign primarily because Louise and I think Don Scott wanted him on there. They begrudgingly put him on there. He ended up being the best touch person. He's not black, but he's ended up being like the best point person on black related stuff. The fact of the matter is that somebody from that grew up in New York, Abigail's from New Jersey, and I'm familiar with New Jersey. She's, been Virginia enough to be a Virginian, but I'm just saying that I don't know that, again, we got to be sort of real about the fact that when people don't grow up around a black community and don't really know what's going on in our communities, we've got to tell them.
Yeah.
I mean, Ralph Northam grew up on the Eastern Shore. He didn't sense that blackface was a big deal. I mean, there was a crisis manager a black crisis manager who was handling that situation. They had to tell them. They had to tell them this is why this is offensive. Like, and at some point we were just like, you know what? We just we got to give. I'm not saying we got to give people grace, but we do have to understand that they don't know what we know. They don't know our family history. I mean, Herb Jones sitting up in Williamsburg has a relative that was lynched. I mean, we got all sorts of stuff going on. Bobby Scott told me the other day that he pointed to a theater sitting up in Phoebus, Hampton that was segregated when he was a kid. And see, we got black elected officials walking around, of course, who lived Jim Crow. Obviously, Louise, Bobby Scott. And so, with all of that said, the answer to your question is no. They do have some younger folks on there who are quite nice, but I
Yeah.
don't think they see the full parameters of what's going on here. The full parameters is they're going to give you a job for 60 or 70,000 bucks. There's nothing wrong with that. Um, I work with Ed Reed, who's at a lobby firm called Two Capitals. Ed Reed is a lobbyist, but he used to work for Justin Fairfax. Great guy. He's the one black person that they got at Two Capitals. They're probably paying him six figures. It's all good. These are all individual wins. There's nothing to be sad about. But we got to think bigger than that. We got to build the scale. And what that means in policy is community investment. And it also means investing in black vendors for these multi-million dollar campaigns. Because, you're seeing people become millionaires that ain't doing nothing that black people can't do on some of these campaigns. So we got to be very direct with Lamont. We got a black chair of the party. I mean, we we got all these black people, but we got to tell them what to do. And so Abigail Spanberger is someone who I just think is not familiar with our community that much in general. I think she's trying, though. She doesn't strike me at all as the type of person who's not trying. She doesn't strike me at all as the type of person who's just like, F it, I'm gonna play act in front of these people, then disappear. I do think there's a shot there, but I don't see anybody on staff that's knocking me out, in terms of, oh wow, this is gonna be the person that we can
Yeah.
go to. I'm sure that they'll hire Tracy DeShazer. I'm sure they'll hire like the people that we know they're gonna hire, they're gonna get hired. And their track record has been to just be the person in the room, almost in a sort of happy to be their position. And it's going to take more than that. Okay. In this era of politics, it's going to take more than that.
Agreed. Kind of going back into party politics. So Republicans claim, this question is from Russell. Republicans claim to make inroads in the Black community, especially with Black men. And we can point to the presidential campaign for that. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, my views on black men are controversial, so I just need to warn everybody. I
Well,
mean,
earlier
I,
you said that we can
you
ask you
probably,
anything.
yeah,
So
yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just going to warn everybody right off the bat. I miss gender studies. I'm a Gen Xer, so I miss the whole gender studies era of college. They didn't really come in until after I was out of college. And I think that's why I'm about to say what I'm about to say. Okay, so black men to me are treated worse than any other group in American politics. It's not even close. Black women are really good at organizing. We got Win with Black Women. We got the Black Girl Magic Energy. We are very supportive of each other as Black women. We're really organized. A lot of that is, quite frankly, the fact that Black women, a lot of times in these organizations, are the real ones doing the real work in the background. A lot of times when I pull the curtain back on somebody's NAACP banquet, what do I see back there? I see a bunch of Black women running around doing all the stuff, setting the tables up, doing this. We see it in church as well in the South, the ushers, the this, to that. The real logistical administrative work oftentimes is done by Black women. We saw that in the Civil Rights Movement. Having said all that, though, Black men are still, I think because they're less organized and they're easier targets, they're treated like they either don't exist or they're treated as some sort of avatar of something negative. We're seeing it right now in the Senate race, by the way, in Senate SD 15 with Deborah Gardner and Mike Jones, where Deborah Gardner drops an ad that goes into the big black brute theory of politics in terms of two restraining orders that Mike Jones has received. I don't want to go into a whole big rabbit hole. I'll just say this. The way restraining orders work in Virginia is that if you request a restraining order, you immediately get it without any evidence presented. So the moment of truth for a restraining order in Virginia is that first court appearance. That's when you find out exactly why that restraining order was issued and the judge makes a decision. In Mike Jones's case, the judge read what his ex-wife wrote and didn't agree that it warranted a restraining order. Him taking the phone out of your hand is not, I'm going to kill you. You know what I'm saying? So that was what was decided. And so, and again, I'm going to go cross party here. The same sort of thing happened to AC Cardoza. I'm a big fan of his opponent, but AC Cardoza had the same sort of commercial. We saw the same thing up in Suffolk with Clint Jenkins. Ad runs. You got these black figures, black male figures strangling a woman like in a shadow. I said, okay, so this is like 4 or 5 times this happened in with no evidence applied. And I've had arguments with Democrats, friends of mine, people I've worked with in the Democratic Party. I've said, where is the evidence that this thing is real? That this was a case that was adjudicated, he was found guilty, etc., and so on. And of course, there is no evidence because he wasn't found guilty in Clint Jenkins's case, and AC Cardoza's case, and now Mike Jones's case. In Justin Fairfax's case, there was no adjudication. It was just, we're accusing you in the public, and this is a press lynching, and then everybody's just going to believe it. So, black men, I'm always surprised that we haven't had a black male group that's popped up and said, we are not voting for you because you obviously hate us and use us as an avatar of negativity. So, we're out of here. I mean, like expecting that to happen any second. I'm surprised it hasn't happened because the Jay Jones episode that we just watched in October to me was the cherry on top of the ice cream. Here you had I mean, I don't know whether y'all probably have encountered Jay a few times. I can't say I know Jay really, really well. He's not a really good friend, but I know him. And I know him enough to know that the idea that this guy has any sort of violent inclinations or violent thoughts or anything is absolutely ridiculous. Jay is let's say it. He's a bougie dude from Norfolk who has two parents who are judges. In some ways, he's a little bit of a white boy dipped in chocolate. I love Jay, but that's kind of who he is. His best friends are Skylar Van Valkenburg and two other white boys, Mullen, former Delegate Mullen. I mean, I like all these people. He's great people, but he's not Don Scott. Don Scott is a brother from the hood. Don Scott is black man. You know what I mean? In the stereotypical sense. Okay.
Mm.
And so he's a guy who's had the black experience, the single, I shouldn't say the black experience like we've all had this because I had both my parents in my house the entire time. But I'm just saying, he had a single parent upbringing. Don did a very humble upbringing. And then, of course, he gets incarcerated during the era of over incarceration during the Clinton era. He was actually a victim of that. He should not have served 8 years for a nonviolent drug offense. Just
Mm.
absolutely ridiculous. And so Jay Jones is the exact opposite of that. And so what I'm bringing all that up to say this, it doesn't matter what type of black person you are. Again, when you walk through that door, you're black. And the party decided with Jay Jones, they know his father, they know his mother. His mother's a judge, his father was a judge. He went to William and Mary, the whole bit, just like Justin Fairfax. Went to Duke, went to Columbia. It still doesn't matter. The minute you're accused of something, you are guilty. We do not want to hear your story. I thought it was a terrible thing that Abigail abandoned him and abandoned Hashmi. And even went as far as to change the wrap on the campaign bus. Because remember, the first bus had the three names on it. It had Spanberger, and then it had Hashmi and Jones. They changed the wrap on the bus. They never appeared in public together again. She shunned his campaign. She gets up at a debate and then doesn't confirm that she's in support of the nominee for attorney general. Okay, that is unheard of. That is unheard of. One of my friends is a Paul Goldman, who was the attorney from Richmond, who was Doug Wilder's campaign manager. These things are unheard of. We did several podcasts on this because it was outrageous. Now, I'm not saying she's got to be totally deferential to Jay. Jay made a mistake. It was a mistake. But you don't have to necessarily get out and be like, okay, I'm going to totally shun you. And thank goodness he won. I mean, we can't afford not to have a Democrat as the attorney general when we see the federal government renditioning people to El Salvador, and we see ICE out here grabbing American citizens with no due process, with no procedure. We don't even know that these people are cops. How about that? Okay, I'm dating a federal police officer who just retired. My father was a cop, my nephew was a cop in Virginia Beach. I understand from listening to their stories what you're supposed to do when you approach somebody. And self ID is a basic tenet of due process. And you got idiots like Kim Taylor tweeting out that, oh my God, the Democrats want to have a bill that the cops can't have masks on. We don't even know if these guys are cops. We've already had impersonation issues with this. And of course, the Trump administration is going to protect us. So understand, black men in this moment should be the group that's pissed off the most because they get thrown under the bus quicker than any group. And I know we have that Malcolm X quote about black women are most disrespected. I don't see that black men get it any easier than black women in our society. I think black men get it worse right now, and I think nobody really advocates for them. And for a guy like Jay Jones to be treated like that with his entire pedigree and resume made no sense. Even if he didn't have that pedigree and resume, it wouldn't make sense. But it particularly made no sense because these people did know him. We only had two people that stood up for him in that moment that I can remember. Tim Kaine, because remember the first day of it, everybody put out a statement. Yeah, Jay is terrible. Jay is terrible. Jay is terrible. You guys may know I also do some crisis management. And one of the things about crisis management Democrats need to understand is it is in fact strategic to keep your mouth shut sometimes. You don't have to make a statement on every single thing. You don't have to say something on every single thing. I don't care how many times some right-wing reporter is calling you for comment. You don't have to make a comment on everything. They use your comments against our attorney general candidate. That's all they did. They used the Democratic comments to punish Jay so he could lose. And you saw what the Republicans were doing. Oh, he should not take office if he gets elected. Oh, he should drop out. This is outrageous. I mean, this is outrageous because they knew they couldn't win. I'm sure that Miaras' people were looking at their numbers in the background and knew we're losing. We got to get this guy to drop out or get them to get him to drop out to win this thing. And now we're sitting here looking at the first black attorney general at a time we need a somebody who cares about due process being the attorney general. It's a scary time we live in, and the Democratic Party should recognize that. But again, Abigail doesn't grow up in a world where she has to worry about getting pulled over. She doesn't worry about her kids getting pulled over. We got the next JLARC study, I'm sure will tell us that black Virginians are getting pulled over more than anybody else, because every JLARC study says that. Then nobody does anything about it. But the point is, that's why we have to have an agenda. That's why we have to teach. We have to teach some of these white politicians the stuff that we go through and why we're here asking for certain things. We shouldn't have to, given all the videos we watch of black men getting shot by the police, but we do have to do it because you saw what happened during the campaign. She is modeling toward, I am pro-police, I was a police officer, I was law enforcement, all that. That's not something that we should be comfortable with. She should be in favor of due process for everybody, black, white, north, south, east, west. And that's it. But when you see a video of a black man in army fatigues, who's an army lieutenant, get pepper sprayed in the face on what should have been a routine traffic stop, and everybody acts like that's no big deal, that is a big deal. That is a big deal. Shout out to Mark Herring for going, Mark Herring and Bobby Scott did send a letter to the Department of Justice when that happened in Windsor a few years ago. But the point is, we got to be really unapologetic about what our agenda is because Abigail is going to be, we're going to have to push her. And I think black men in particular should have no problem being at the front of that. But again, black women right now are having a really good political moment. We are doing a lot. We've got really high organization. I think black men should duplicate that because what I see politically is that they get thrown under the bus hard and fast, hard and fast. So that's my observation, and there's a lot of examples of that.
So what one thing that I'm hearing is one theme that I'm hearing is just like the need for unified messaging or
Mhm.
of Black people coming together across the state to make sure that we establish this agenda, that elected officials know what we want and they push for it. So one of the reasons for forming this group, the Northern Virginia Democratic Black Caucus, is because of the perception that the Hampton Roads area and Richmond are kind of like the center of gravity for Democratic politics. So I have a two-parter question. Is that your observation that, and then I think this kind of um, is related to what you said earlier as far as the importance or the difference when you have Black people voting for Black elected officials versus white people or non-Black people voting for Black elected officials. So do you agree that more so the Hampton Roads area and Richmond are kind of like the center of gravity for Black Democratic politics? And if so, the second part of my question is, what can we do? And this goes back to Paul's question in the chat.
Yeah.
How can Black communities across Northern Virginia, all of those regions, bridge those regional divides strategically for effective political action?
Well, no matter where anybody's from, there should be at least three things that everybody agrees on. I mean, I know that just like every other community, we have a lot of things that we want to work on, but there should be some th two or three unifying policies. To me, all three of them should involve money in some way, shape, or form. I know that when we talk about community development, a community does have to be picked if we're talking about community development. I can think of several. In Nova, it's always seen as, oh, the money's in Nova, the jobs are in Nova. Now that's starting to get challenged by the fact that Trump is laying off so many federal employees. He's threatening the economics of Black folks in particular. I think we all know that so many pensions and careers and everything else are built off of federal jobs, and that was disproportionately assisting Black folks in Virginia and Maryland, and of course Washington D.C. Now he's threatening that. We see the statistic about the 300,000 layoff of Black women, and that's connected to federal jobs. But in terms of Black agenda, there should be, again, three or four things, two or three things that we all agree with that anyone who's Black in the Commonwealth should be front and center on. And one of them to me should be some sort of something related to SWAM or minority investment and business or just the fact that the Democratic Party, with all these millions are moving, and we are the only group in the under the Democratic umbrella. Black voters are the group that makes them win elections, that has them win elections. We're it. We get to say that no other minority group that you want to talk about all the time gives you the win like we give you the win. Okay, we give you the win more than anybody, and particularly in places like Richmond and Hampton Roads. But yes, there is a north-south divide there. But I do think it can be bridged by agreeing on one or two things, whatever they may be. You should be able to drill it down. That could be the subject of long argument. But I do think, with regard to vendors for political campaigns, that to me should be one of the three because it doesn't matter where you're from on that one. The party's spending millions and millions of dollars and doesn't have any Black vendors on anything, and then Black voters are putting these people in power. So somebody should just be bringing that up just globally. And I do think, there's a building issue with mass surveillance. I don't know why this would matter north or south because flock safety, you have a problem too with Black politics in that we do not have the big Black powerful political action committee. You know, APAC, for example, the Jewish lobby has the big, powerful, moneyed committee, so they can push people around with the money, even though they don't have the numbers. Their numbers are less than ours, but they have more political leverage. They're able to leverage politicians with the money. We're able to leverage politicians with the votes. You'll notice that no one's organizing that. Like nobody's actually saying, hey, wait a minute, we're not going to do this. We're going to tell black people not to vote for this person if we don't get this thing. You don't hear anybody saying that. And then also on top of that, you hear the constant discussion about voting rights, which is totally necessary. But I think that that's actually acting as a proxy to keep us quiet on other issues they don't want us really bringing up. So it's not that it's not an issue, but frankly, because of Sia Price and so many other delegates and members of the General Assembly, that issue is in a pretty good position. We've got early voting. We've improved our status as a state with regard to voting, and I'm not sure why that keeps coming up, but it's always let's just talk about voting rights. Then we're filling the whole meeting with voting rights and not really talking about money or investment or the things that really. And remember, the governor in Virginia has the line item ability. And line item ability means that the governor in Virginia can effectively decide that something is going to get funded by the stroke of her pen. Okay. And so these are things that this is what we should be asking for if we can, figure out what those things are. So I'm just saying, I think the reason that Hampton Roads is centered is historic and real and present day. You know, Hampton, of course, is where the slaves came in to America at Fort Monroe. Yeah, I can feel the difference when I talk to people in Nova and in Hampton. It is incredible because Hampton is like, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, we're unapologetic, and this is what this is. And of course, when you go to tailgate at Battle of the Bay or any one of the HBCUs, you just can feel it. You can feel a sense of we own this, we control this. I think Dr. Harvey, even though he was a little bit conservative when he was president of Hampton, the whole aura of it is this is our space. We're not making any apologies. Obviously, in Nova, it's a little bit different. We are outnumbered, and you're going to see the elected officials in Nova act that way because they have to appease their white constituents just like they have to do stuff for us. I totally get it, but that's why I think a lot of the energy is coming out of Richmond and Hampton. But there's some odd to me plantation politics that goes on that doesn't make any sense. I mean, I'll give you just one example. So mid-October, Clean Virginia does an event called The Energy Bill is Too Damn High or something like that. Remember they had one in Prince William and they invite, Josh Cole, they invite Luke, they invite all the folks that are in the House, the delegates in the area. And what happened in the background is Luke Torian tried to present a conflicting event so that they could not show up because you have to understand at the end of the day, this thing is about money. Dominion is the number one donor to all of these politicians, black and white. They're the number one donor for Don Scott. They're the number one donor, I think, for Mamie Locke. They're up there for Louise. They get what they want. We just saw another rate increase go through. They're trying to build these data centers. They're trying to get what they want on whatever it is they want. So any pushback to that is met with some very odd things. We're talking about affordability, and yet Luke Torian's trying to block these members from going to a energy affordability event. Like, why is that happening? So you got to be kind of paying attention to what you are seeing as a community that makes no sense. I've seen my mother's, Dominion bill for her little house in Suffolk, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me, right? You've absolutely got to be kidding me. It just keeps going up and up. And these are the types of things, too, that I think everybody black in the entire Commonwealth could unite on. The energy bills are getting higher. This is a main bill that everybody has to pay. You can't avoid it. And stuff like that. I mean, even things like, even though this is not a high bill, it's only $20 a year, but the safety inspection for cars every year. We had a white member of the General Assembly, a Republican, who tried to repeal that last session. He was stopped by the Democrats. I said to my Democratic friends, why are we trying to stop that? There's no correlation between the safety inspection and safety. Everybody knows that. This is a bonanza for these, they have good lobbyists for these gas station owners. That's why we have it. A lot of these states don't have it. New York, Maryland, they don't have it. In fact, I've heard people say to me, I'm not moving to Virginia because I got to do the safety and emissions inspection every freaking. It's an annoyance. And everybody knows that when you go to get it, oh, your wiper blade is out of, let's get new wiper blade. Like this is a bonanza so they lobby. It's lobbyists. It's lobbying money. So we got to be real about we might not have the money. It's unlikely given our numbers. We're still indexed at 28% poverty. 28% of African Americans in this country are under the poverty level. So it's unlikely we're going to have an APAC level pack. But we do have the votes. We control these elections and we control a lot of these districts. We just have to leverage the power that we have.
And I think that that's such a perfect segue into the question that Karen Camblin asked about climate resilience. And so the data center issue is something that I am closely watching for a number of reasons. But just to that point, Karen is asking, so she said, how do we build a strong voice in the Black community in the climate resilient space? It's a large, encompassing issue when it comes to affordability and clean spaces. But kind of adding in my own kind of sauce to that question, I do think that the data center issue is something that Black communities should be
Yeah.
watching right now. You have a lot of white voters and white residents that
Yep.
are concerned
Mhm.
because they're
Yep.
focusing on rural areas and they've got the space and they've got the land and they've got the infrastructure. But
Right.
Black communities specifically, we're the ones that get the short end of the stick
Right.
when it comes to clean air and clean water, especially when it comes to folks like Dominion. So, how
Yeah.
do we make sure that Black voters that we're paying attention to climate resilience issues?
Yeah, well, that issue, I think Jay Jones is going to come in real handy on that one. One of the things that people missed during the debate, because everybody's paying attention to text messages, he really socked Dominion in the mouth during that debate in a way that I don't think we've ever seen before, realizing that all three of our statewides did not take a dime of Dominion money, which has never happened before. The only statewide official we ever had that didn't take a dime of Dominion money that got elected was Justin Fairfax. Now you have three more, including the governor of Virginia, Abigail Spanberger. Whether or not she will leverage that into something, I don't know, but they're more open to the discussion than we would have had if millions of dollars had gone into their campaigns from Dominion. We all know that when they do these projects, the data centers, the this, the that, it ends up in some black community or adjacent to a black community, or these things that affect climate end up adjacent to some usually poor black neighborhood is what we typically see. The railroad track going right through the neighborhood. I think Doug Wilder still tells the story about 95 separating the black community in Richmond from the white community. So you got to be really eyes open when these things start moving forward. You're right. This is an issue where the black sort of power structure can join with the white power structure because there's a ton of white folks out there saying the exact same thing that black folks are saying about the electrical bills, about Dominion. Now, I will say this candidly, with the exception of Clean Virginia, there isn't a whole lot of evidence that their advocacy actually moves the needle in an election. I mean, I can't sit here and say that Abigail won because she didn't take Dominion money, right? I think she won. I think the three of them won primarily because of the cycle we are in politically, which mirrors the 2017 cycle. The second year of Donald Trump in office, which was bad in 2017. He's even worse now, and he's going to be worse next year when we have a wave election again. We're going to see another wave election of Democratic lawmakers coming into Congress. But yeah, the I am not Karen. I am not an expert on clean energy policy or environmental policy. I just have the common sense to know what I see in black communities when I see stupid stuff that gets built right adjacent to a black community. I know what I know, some of what I know from the late Don McEachin, who was very focused on that policy, but I'm not an expert on it. But it is a good position politically to see that our three statewide electeds were not bought by Dominion, and we do have a ton of members of the House of Delegates coming in that are not just not bought by Dominion, but they're anti-Dominion. I mean, Danica Rome sitting there, and a lot of these other folks that are coming in. She came in, of course, years ago, but they came in on affordability. They really came in on what Mom Dami is talking about or what AOC talks about, and it's true. Things just get more and more expensive, right? So, but we got to get the attention of some of our top electeds on the fact that they're getting a lot of money from these people, and I don't see a whole lot of pushback. And at some point, they got to produce that. They're not here to represent Dominion Energy. Okay, they're here to represent the constituents that voted them into office. So that there's that.
So kind of what the whole reason that we're coming together to have this discussion is, and I see that we have some more questions coming in, but one of the questions that came from Bo is, and I think this encompasses issues like that typically our community might not pay so much attention to, like clean energy, like SWAM, minority business investment, things like that. How do we get the word out such that we're effectively getting the word out for Black people, whether they're deep in politics like us, those of us on this call, or folks like my mother and my father. My father voted for the first time in
Wow.
2024 for Kamala Harris. And then my mom, I think this is the first time she voted in like maybe 15 years. These are issues that are going to be important to them, like clean energy. She lives in Woodbridge, so Prince William County, that's going to affect her. So how do we, to Bo's question, how do we get folks on all spectrums of the voting gamut to get involved politically?
That's a really hard one. It's really building of list, building a mailing list. You have to build big mailing list and you've got to blast those mailing lists to as many people as you can. You have to collect as much email data as you can. I keep telling you, this is something that's discussed by a lot of us in media about how you reach the community. Wes Bellamy loves having this discussion about, and he's right about how, to get to the person in the hood, not the folks that like us that we're involved already. We're not really normal. We're the people who are involved already, but the people who are just the average blue collar day-to-day Black person on the street. That how do you get that person? And there's all sorts of analysis around that in the media and beyond. And some of it is landing on a blend of entertainment with, oh, but let's hit them with something serious after we do the entertainment. Getting people who are entertainers, who are politically involved in some of the messaging, stuff like that. But really what I think it all leads to at the end of the day is mailing list building, is email list building, and not producing a lot of friction when you do that. So not asking them every single thing like your phone number, your address, your this, your that, just your email. Just need your email and that's it. Or your phone number, whichever it is. If you're going to text them, text them. It's a lot of it. You see it in some of these political campaigns, as you all know. Our phones blow up in Virginia, they blow up every year when there's a campaign. There's a campaign every year. But you see all the texts that come in, you see all the emails come in. It's that level of organization. You have to, and I can absolutely guarantee you, and I'm always shocked by it. My mailing list for Black Virginia News is 29,000 people. That to me isn't really that many.
Wow.
I have friends in media that are up at 200,000. Like Joy Reid is like at 230,000, predictably. Roland Martin has a mailing list. I think he said last time I heard him bring it up was like 80 or 90,000, probably more than that. But he is able to reach a lot of people, even though his thing is national. See, we have the advantage of it's just Virginia. And really, in my view, in my world, just Black folks in Virginia is who I'm targeting. I got a lot of white folks on the list that read it, but I'm saying the target audience is Black folks, right? So, but that's what it is. How you get the message out is that. It is that thing. And it is unfortunately controlled by social media. Oftentimes, I'm ticked off that TikTok is going to get controlled by a bunch of people that I know do not have our interest in mind. I liked it when the Chinese were in control. I gave Mark Warner a hard time when I said, "What are you talking about? They're spying. They're not, first of all, they're not spying on us any more than Facebook is spying on." And then second of all, the Chinese didn't care what we were doing on TikTok, so everything was like blowing up. Every time we do, the easiest platform to blow up on is TikTok. It's funny to say this. The second easiest is probably YouTube, but you do have to put a little work in, of course. You always have to put some work in, but I'm saying that is how you get a mass message out. I mean, it is boring to say it, but it's true. I would actually model a little bit. Y'all should model Network Nova a little bit because what they're doing is the weekly call. They have that weekly group. They're getting 200, 250 people on a call. They have 3 interviews. They do the interviews, do it every single week. They're very consistent. And they have, I'm sure, a mailing list that's probably over, I'd be shocked if it was less than 10,000 people. And that's it. It's not really that complicated. It just requires some consistency. Also, Win with Black Women would be the other one that I would bring up. They are very good at just the weekly call. We're talking about our issues. We have a few people talking, and then they're collecting data, collecting data, collecting data. So every time you go into the Zoom, you put in your, email. So that's how you get the big message out. It's not fancy. It's actually kind of tedious. But we do have the technology now that's really helpful. Remember, during the March on Washington, they didn't have none of that. They have a mimeograph and Eleanor Holmes Norton in the back with a piece of paper going like this with the mimeograph, and they got millions of people to show up to Washington, D.C. So just think about what these folks had to go through in the 60s to get a message out that we don't have to do. We don't have to do any of that. We just have to put a bunch of videos up and get Substack going because Substack is built for this. Substack is built for put your email in, and hey, let's blast out messages to you. And that's what it is.
Kind of going back into campaign finance, folks have said that Virginia is like the wild, wild west of campaign finance. One of the questions that Russell has is that Dems had a huge fundraising advantage in the House of Delegate races. How do you think that happened?
It happened because Don Scott has now taken over as the king of fundraising in Virginia. We used to sit here and watch Jeff Shapiro and RTD. I can't stand RTD, but RTD would, oh my God, Terry McAuliffe is the Uber fundraiser. Terry McAuliffe is this and Terry McAuliffe is that. I'm like, okay, well, Don just eclipsed that like 30 and 40 fold, and did something that's never been done in the history of Virginia politics, not only on the fundraising level, but on the level of the results. I mean, 64 seats, when does that happen? There's a little divide in the media and certainly in Virginia politics. They're always trying to make the white folks look like geniuses and the black folks, it's always just luck or something. But
Right.
Don is extremely hardworking, huge work ethic. And when people like Mark Warner, who's a pretty doggone good fundraiser, and obviously if you're worth $300 million, you're probably going to be a good fundraiser. But, Mark Warner has said, man, Don, you're scaring me. You're scaring me with your fundraising. And Don Scott, it takes being on the phone, the mailing list, the work, the whole thing. It's him. It's him and Dan Helmer. They are out there. I ran into Dan Helmer like 3 or 4 times in October in Hampton, just doing events in Hampton with various candidates. And so they're not lazy. They're not sitting around. That's how that happened. Not only did they get the 64 seats, I think they're going to pick up more seats in that 2 years from now. I think they're going to pick up more seats. So it's work ethic. That's how it happened. Unfortunately, we are the Wild West with the uncapped donations. It does allow for a lot of opportunity for people to become successful as consultants. I have a long running series of discussions with friends of mine who are lobbyists and consultants in Virginia who are Black as to why it is there is no leading Black consulting firm or lobby firm in Virginia. We've been trying to figure that out for years
I'd
now.
like to put in a plug for Rooted Consulting Group. We are the only
Oh,
Black-owned,
good.
Black political
Oh,
consulting group
good.
in
Okay.
Virginia. There are
Oh,
two
good.
people that won their races because of the work that we did. I just want to put in
Oh,
that
good.
plug.
Oh, good. Because we're contemplating some sort of Virginia Green Book. There is actually a guy in Hampton that has a Hampton Roads Green Book. So now we're contemplating a Virginia Green Book that has all the Black vendors in it, right? So because we're tired of, because generally what you hear is some version from white folks of, well, we can't find anybody. Or, well, I'm like, wait a minute. They can't build the scale if you don't hire them. So you're not hiring them. This is
Right.
black tax because you can't tell me there's nobody consulting because we can see the individual people. We see the Brandon Randlemans. We see people who are individuals working on campaigns that could very easily be in you know, Aaron Carter works for Mark Warner, but Ryan Jackson worked for Aaron Rouse, and he just did a consulting firm. So I said to Ryan, I'm like, get 2 other Black folks and boom, it's a firm. And then you funnel, everybody into that. Bobby Scott, Louise, everybody. Like just be like, and so I'm not down with this idea that there's no people around. I see too many Black operatives. I see too many Black people hustling in the background, getting stuff together, frantically working before an event. A lot of times I'll come to an event 30 minutes before and I see invariably someone Black running around doing something for a candidate, busting their ass. Not that I don't see white folks, but I thought the Spanberger campaign was extremely white. I mean, we had a story queued up. I said to them, so how many Black vendors do you have? Of course, that scared the hell out of them. They did, sort of a series of off the records with me about it. I said, okay, y'all can just admit that you don't have any real Black vendors that you've hired. But then again, I thought, how mad can I get at these people? Because I could say the same things about several Black elected officials. So if we do the story, that would be included. And then there were people who showed up as winners in that story that I would not have guessed because we went and researched a few years back. Um, but the point is, we got to figure that out because that is where the big money is. This unlimited money is allowing people to become very wealthy, and they're paying their mortgages and they're sending their kids to private school, and we could be doing the same exact thing. And there's no reason we're not doing the same exact thing. Um, there's just there's so much I could say. We could have a 2 hour Zoom just on this subject because there's too many black restaurants. There's too many, photographers and videographers I've seen that I said to myself, this is the same thing that the TV people do for huge money in these campaigns. And not only are black folks doing it, they're doing it better. You're seeing the stuff
Mhm.
online and going, who the heck did that video? And then you're finding out that it's someone black with a camera in their hand. So we got to get real about that, but we also got to put some pressure on these black elected officials who are handling millions of dollars. That would be Don Scott, that would be Louise Lucas. Bobby Scott's not a huge fundraiser. He could be. We're trying to turn him in that direction because he's a very big believer in hiring our folks, and I just think we got to be organized about it. We got to be organized about it because I do think it will happen, but we got to put pressure on these people because that's an argument that's gone on too long, way too long.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question that might be a little bit left field, but then I'll get back to Kim Taylor. I see your question, then another question from Russell. What are your thoughts on Lamont Bagby as far as the chair of the Democratic Party?
Lamont's a great guy. He's a good, he's just like he's a nice guy. He is a nice guy. He's not the most energetic dude in the world. He's a great guy and he's there for a reason. These people are not there by accident. They're often, they're not hiring somebody who's like Malcolm X or something. They're going to hire somebody who's easy to get along with, kind of does what they're told, sort of affable. I mean, that's generally how you rise in politics. And for black folks, we have the added problem of the minute that we display that we're going to work for black communities and be very diligent about that, anybody who has sort of any Maynard Jackson level energy is going to get in trouble really, really fast. Because, that's what it is in our politics. That's what it is in our country and our history. White folks can see that. They can see that, okay, wait a minute, this person's actually going to do stuff for black people. We don't necessarily want that person in power. You may have guessed because I did work for Justin Fairfax, and I'm not a huge fan of LeVar Stoney. I'm not a huge fan of LeVar Stoney because he spent his entire career sort of working only for white folks and then doing things that only benefited white folks. You have a project like a Navy Hill or a casino project, and I see that you're trying to pretend that you've got a black person sort of running that, which is Roger Liggins, but really it was Churchill Downs that was running that, which are white folks in Tennessee. Look, let's just be real. Follow the money and follow what the people are doing. And sometimes you get a rare white person will show up and do something. So I mean, I'm not ruling out white folks because you do get, a Mackenzie Scott visit or something that happens where you're like, well, I can't believe this person's doing this, but they're doing it. But we do need to be very deliberate. Ask your question again. I forgot the front part of it. What was it? Say it again.
Sorry, I have
Lamont,
dogs.
Lamont Bagman. It was
Yeah.
Lamont Bagman. So Lamont, so I'm sorry. So Lamont is a good guy, but I'm not looking for revolutionary behavior. He is a lot of times what they do with the party heads is it is a placeholder for elected officials. And elected officials like stability, predictability, and they are very risk averse, even when they don't have to be risk averse. I'm like, give me a break. You're in an 80% Democratic district and you're still worried about what exactly, right? So, but they're very risk averse. So Lamont's the type of character is go along, get along type of guy. Um, but there's nothing about him to hate. He's a nice guy. Like, there's nothing, but I'm not sensing that I'm gonna get, the type of direction on the money that I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is the money. I'm always looking at where's the money going to, who's getting paid, who's getting hired, what are they getting paid? And can that person then build something after that? And I'm not
Mhm.
seeing that yet, but he just got there. Sure as heck didn't see it with Swecker. So, you know, I mean, I'm waiting to see something, but you do have to realize too, the top of ticket, the leader of the party is the governor's office. It's just like on the national level. The leader of the party was Jen O'Malley Dillon and Joe Biden, not Jamie Harrison. Okay.
Mhm.
Jamie Harrison was the chair of the DNC, and that was all very cute. But the people who make the decisions about who gets that money, that consultant money, who's this, who's that, that ends up being whoever the president is, and whoever they put in charge in that office. And it's the same thing in Virginia. And really, it's modeled that way because of Terry McAuliffe, oftentimes, because Terry McAuliffe's people are still sort of involved in too much, if you ask me. He makes a lot of white boys very happy, but I don't see anybody black becoming rich. So I'm a little bit suspicious, not even LeVar. So it's kind of like, what's going on here? And that's how I measure these situations. We've got millions of dollars flying around, and I don't see one black person that's building a house someplace. Or so that's what I'm looking for. That's how I judge it. Now, other people may judge it and have different metrics, but my metrics are almost always the money. And in a state where you have unlimited donations, now, to be candid, just to finish it off by saying this, when I work for Justin Fairfax, you have to understand, you have donors that tell candidates point blank to their face, I will give you this 50,000, but you can't spend it on this. I will give you this 100,000, but you have to spend it on that. So don't put it past some of these donors to be telling these elected officials, I'll give you the money, but you can't spend it on X, Y, and Z. And if you think any of these people are saying spend it on black people, you would be shut. That ain't happening. So in most cases, we do have a few black donors. Now, Sheila Johnson is not involved in politics. I wish she was. We have a few black donors who are pretty good in Virginia, but I remember being in a meeting, Don Peebles, who's based in New York, but he's a real estate guy in the DMV and DC in particular. He gave Justin 50,000 in 2017 and point blank told him, you should spend that. You be spending on something black and black radio. I mean, so you could get the occasional black donor who'll say that, but remember the donors run this party. So
Mm,
Lamont might be in office and might be a chair of the party, but the donors, and those donors are white facing 99% of the time. It's Emily's List, Planned Parenthood, Dominion, and
right.
yeah, they might, I get it. Planned Parenthood, Emily's List might put a black woman in charge as their executive director, but the person running the show is going to be somebody white. Just pay attention when you go to somebody's gala. Who's standing, who's on the dais, for the Emily's List gala. You can see it as clear as day. So, with that understanding, Lamont's a good guy, but he's not in full control of everything.
Right. And not making a direct comparison with this statement, but speaking of performative black people being controlled by white people, what were your thoughts on Winsome Sears? Was she a bat to Russell's question? And those weren't Russell's words, those were mine, but these are Russell's words.
She
Was she a bad candidate and is her political career over?
Probably, but she's an older person. Her political career probably would have been over anyway. Winsome Sears, actually, I had a good relationship with her. We were on a transition team from Justin to Winsome. Went great. It was me and Chris Saxman and a few other people. Um, she was great. She was fantastic. She, to me, was just a regular Republican who was forced into, oh, you got to be MAGA now because we got this lunatic up here that makes you be MAGA. She actually criticized Donald Trump in two separate interviews, which she paid a price for because you saw Glenn Youngkin didn't throw all his money behind her in a way that he probably could have. Although I do think Youngkin did more than I thought he was going to do, but he still didn't do as much money as he surely could have. But Sears is a little bit of an odd character. She's kind of like your wacky aunt from Jamaica, and it's just not something that she was good at masking after a while. But they didn't really support her. They didn't support her as much as if that had been Glenn Sturtevant or Mark Peake up there, Senator Peake or Senator Sturtevant running, you'd have saw a lot more support for her candidacy. So I'm not really good. I'm not into bashing Winsome Sears. To me, she's a black Republican, and that's just what it was. And it wasn't a particularly well-run campaign, and you saw the results.
Mm. Yeah, I have very little sympathy for it, especially a black woman who runs on the platforms that she ran that could, if she would have won, would have really, really hurt the black community, especially
Mm,
black women. So I have no sympathy.
mm.
But I want to make sure I get to Kim's question. She said the governor of South Carolina has introduced legislation to end race-based or race-focused contracts. How do we defend against possible enactment from the Trump administration?
Yeah, some of that could be changed in state law. Some of the stuff that they're doing could be switched and codified in the state laws. There's nothing stopping anybody from putting together some package that says the Commonwealth of Virginia, 10% of the contracts are going to go to black vendors. There's nobody stopping anybody from doing that. Or then what they'll do is say minority vendors. You always have to be aware of some of this legislative language when it comes to racial stuff. Okay. Now, Trump administration will come back and say, well, that's discriminatory. So all of this is driven by Stephen Miller's little law
Mm,
group that decided to declare that it was racism for there to be any preference in anything. Okay. Then there was a lawsuit. There was a private group that tried to do venture capital for I think it was black women business owners. They got sued and lost. And you got to be
Mhm.
kidding me with that because de facto, what most of these white groups do is they give the money to white folks, and it may not say anything in there about, okay, we're trying to give it to white folks, but that's who they're giving it to 100% of the time. We just have to duplicate some of the effort and just keep it moving and stop getting depressed about the times that they win. They're winning because, of course, Trump is filling the federal bench with a bunch of his acolytes. They're winning because they're mad. They saw Barack Obama smoothly go through 8 years with no controversy, and they hated him for it because he's perfect, right? They know that, and they can't keep up. That's how we ended up with Donald Trump in the first place. He was mad that Barack Obama had something he didn't have, and he just had
Mhm.
to run for president. As
Mhm.
somebody who grew up in New York, I saw Donald Trump in the paper every freaking day. He never mentioned anything about running for president. Then
Mhm.
all of a sudden, black guy gets it. Now I've got to be running for president. So it's all ego crazy stuff, but we got 37 black folks that are going to be in that General Assembly, and three of them in high position of power, and a black AG who is not going to stop any of it. We got to leverage that. We've got to think about the fact that there are certain people who will act on some of these things that we see getting repealed, whether it's affirmative action or anything else.
I'm going to ask one more question before we end our
Hmm.
specific
Hmm.
Q&A between you and I, and then
Hmm.
open it up for folks if they want to
Hmm.
briefly have
Right.
any remarks or questions for you. What are your thoughts on Ghazala Hashmi being the first Muslim woman elected? What do you think that says about Virginia? It's a two-part question. Then also,
Yeah.
you have expressed your thoughts on LeVar Stoney, but what do you think is next for Stoney and Rouse?
Hopefully nothing for Stoney, and
Okay.
hopefully Rouse runs for governor. LeVar is problematic. But I'll go to Hashmi and I'll get back to LeVar. So, Ghazala Hashmi is a really competent, really smart senator. One of my jobs when I was working for Justin is I had to sit in the Senate caucus meeting. So I saw close up. She had just come in 20, I think she came in 2017 or 2019. I can't remember, maybe 2019. But she was always really good, really thoughtful, really smart. Dick Saslaw was then the majority leader now, and as you know, Scott Surville's majority leader. But I got to see Hashmi. So we had a few tough moments because I remember at one point there was something that came up. Remember, the Senate was 21-19 as it is now. So we would get a fair amount of tie votes for the lieutenant governor. You had to really sort of pay attention. At that time, we had Lionel Sproul and Chad Peterson in there and Joe Morrissey, and they were unpredictable. I mean, I had to check in with them on a regular basis and ask, "Are you going to vote with the Republicans today?" Depending on what it was. Before Sproul, he voted against everything LGBT, and Peterson would vote anything against anything that hurt any sort of business whatsoever. So I just would look out for that. And Morrissey, I know he's a controversial person, but he was one of the best when it came to justice reform issues for black people specifically. Morrissey was against everything that hurts black communities, mandatory minimums, you know, he was a defense attorney, so some of it was his defense attorney experience. But of course, I know he's controversial. But anyway, I still had to sort of watch them. But Hashmi to me was very smart. Every now and then we'd get something where Justin would turn to me and say, I'm not voting for that, even though it's the governor's bill. So if that comes up to a tie, I'm going to vote against it. And one time it was Hashmi's bill. And I said to Hashmi, I said, just so you know, Lieutenant Governor is going to vote against that. If he goes, she says to me, she's really funny because she's understated, but she's cool. She goes, that's the governor's bill, right? I said, yeah. The lieutenant governor is having trouble understanding part of it and doesn't like it, and so then they talk. So Hashmi's a good person. I think she's going to be a very stable player back there, and she's going to be fine. She did take a lot of nonsense, though, with regard to Muslim nonsense that she had to put up with. That to me, this is where Lamont should be stepping up and putting out a statement saying, "We as a party reject this type of anti-Muslim talk." And to me, there should have been a very obvious statement blowing up John Reed from the party. I think they might have did they put anything out? I don't know if they did, but they're very slow to react to some things that I think need to be stated in public. That should be done a lot more by Lamont, and he's a little bit too quiet. I know. Then I found out they didn't have a communications director, so that might have been some of it. But That's the thing with Hashmi. She'll be fine. It'll be great. But we're going to have moments where they're going to go after her. Even Youngkin said something stupid at a rally two weeks before Election Day. That should have been gone after. That brings me to say this. We should, as a group, African American group, should pressure some of these white politicians to be talking when stuff like that happens. Because we're seeing blatant, open, unabashed, brazen racism. They're trying to normalize it for a reason. They're trying to make it seem like it's just okay, and it's not okay. We should get some of our allies making statements. We should be bugging them to make statements like they do when something happens the other way around. Um, I think that the reason that Aaron Rouse is not going to be sworn in as lieutenant governor on what is it, the 15th of January, is LeVar Stoney, who foolishly runs for a governor, then switches office. Which, by the way, why did you switch office? There could have been a very interesting discussion had that been a race between LeVar Stoney and Abigail Spanberger. Instead, we get no discussion at all. And we get the anointing of a candidate, which I always think is problematic no matter who it is. And then get no primary. The party doesn't like primaries because they don't want to spend any money on anything. But the voters should really like primaries because you want to see people have a discussion on policy. You're not going to see that when a candidate gets anointed and there's only one candidate. So then LeVar, of course, goes to run for LG, splits the vote with Aaron, who should have been the winner, and Hashmi is now going to be the lieutenant governor. So one of the things I want this group to think about is how we get a black governor. We get a black governor either through Congress or a black LG or AG. You might have noticed right at the top of the little incident with the text messages with Jay Jones, you had people texting, "Oh my God, he can't run for governor now in 4 years." I mean, they're already thinking about that. Oh my God, he can't run for governor. Oh, actually, he can run for governor because he's going to serve 4 years AG. He's going to reinvent whatever his career is going to be. Not that he needs to reinvent, but he is. And then he's going to run for governor in 4 years. That's what Jay Jones is going to do. I'm going to say it right now. He's going to run for governor. I don't know that, of course, from Jay. I'm just saying that. But I'm just saying that they see that. They see, oh, shoot, this person might be another black governor. We don't really want that. So you got to understand that we got to figure out why it is that there seems to be a whites only sign on the mansion right now. There's
Mhm.
always something that befalls somebody right before they might be the governor of Virginia when they're black. And we saw what happened in 2021, and I don't think it's fair to say to people like Jennifer McClellan or Justin or Jennifer Foy, you shouldn't run because another black person's running. And I mean, I know that's a really hard conversation to have, but it did split the vote. Obviously, Terry was anointed. The party in Swecker was for Terry from day one. Blah, 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 blah. We do have to think about that. So LeVar to me LeVar is problematic. LeVar, like I said, it'll be in the book, but LeVar is very problematic. Um, Aaron Rouse should actually be the incoming lieutenant governor. It'll be interesting to see what Aaron does next. I hope LeVar doesn't do anything next, but I know he will. And that's that. You guys can call me offline if you want the details, but
I'm
again, the book,
definitely calling you offline.
the book. I put my personal information in there, but LeVar is quite something. He is quite something.
Perfect.
Yeah, he's a trip.
Okay. This is really, really good. Russell, if it's okay with you, we can take questions from
Yep.
the group that's on. I'm going to ask that your questions are brief, no soliloquies, please, no speeches. Lauren, thank you so much for putting your email address and your phone number in the chat for those who want to take it down. I'm definitely doing that because we need to talk more about Rouse and Stony.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Russell, I'm going to hand off to you to however you want to organize questions from our group.
Great. Thank you, Alpha. You did a fantastic job. And thank you, Lauren. You you were very fulsome in your answers. And so we really, really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Everyone who participated today, thank you. Those were some really, really good questions.
Yeah.
But we're not finished. I began the program by explaining what our organization has done, but perhaps you would like to know more about what we want to do. So let's use this final section of the program to answer any questions you might have for the leaders of our group, the Northern Virginia Democratic Black Caucus. If you have something that we did not cover with Lauren, we can certainly do that while she's still here. But I fully recognize that she might want to take a break. So we can use this opportunity to answer some different type of questions. If you have a question, raise your hand virtually, and then you can unmute, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can before we wrap up for today. And of course, everyone is now going to be shy.
That's all right. I get it. I mean, it's fine. But remember, I am that person that will answer anything. I will be the rare person that has no fear of answering any question. 'Cause I think these things are not useful if, in fact, you're not candid. Because candor in this moment of history is required.
All right, Karen, I see you've
Aaron Campbell.
raised your hand, so why don't you go for it? Can you unmute yourself?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
I can hear you.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you so much for being here. This has been just an amazing conversation with you, as always. Um, One of the statements that you had made earlier reminded me of this question, and how do we expand that message for the Black community? And I'm kind of going back to being a vendor or even participating in the conversation of climate resilience. We're always, or even clean energy, we're always talking about how do we lower this or how do we prevent the siting of that. But we never have that conversation about the opportunities that are on the table. And I feel that we're leaving that behind, whether it's getting academic programs for kiddos,
Right.
whether it's, job opportunities. Typically, when they come into our neighborhoods to build something, they always profess, yeah. Oh, sorry, short. Let me stop that. So, how do we talk about academic, business opportunity, entrepreneurships, all of those things? How do we get those conversations as part of what is happening right now?
Well, that to me is, remember, Clean Energy Lobby has a ton of money. There's a ton of money in that lobby, not just from Clean Virginia, but just there's just money. There's a lot of money folks that love putting money into anything that has anything to do with you saying anything about the environment or clean energy. So look for those people would be the number one. And like I said, the number two is if you guys had like some sort of weekly discussion that was like open to whoever the heck wanted to show up, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, particularly if you have subjects like this. The other pressure point is, during the session, there's a lot of lobby days. There's, of course, a lobby day for clean energy. There's, I think, several of them actually. And somebody sent me, I think it was my friend Josh Stanfield, who has a Substack called Virginia Politics Revealed. That dude knows a lot of little things. He sent me the schedule of the groups or the days, the lobby days. Now, some of them are just sort of set in stone, the Delta Day and this and that, but a lot of them are policy related. I'm sure that that's a day you want to put pressure on these lawmakers. You want to request meetings with them on these issues. Request a meeting of your elected representatives. It would take only 3 or 4 people to do that and say, we want to talk about why our electric bills are so high. We see that you're taking a lot of Dominion money, like what's going on with that? Like that type of a meeting. Now, for a lot of people, they have lobbyists doing that, but I actually think it's more impressive to have actual real people doing that from the community. But that type of thing, and of course, like I said before, the collection of everybody's email who's involved, just email list building is huge. It's a huge factor in organizing. Um, and there's several Substacks, by the way, on the question of organizing in this moment. And I'm linked to them. If you go to the desktop version of Black Virginia News and go to the right and to the bottom, one of my suggestions is something called the connector. I think the Substack is called the connector, and they have all these suggestions about organizing. You might want to look at that. But again, the Network Nova model is pretty good. The one thing they don't do is put a lot of pressure. Like Network Nova doesn't really lobby. They show up for stuff, the ERA, women's stuff, but they don't really do that. But that's the piece as Black folks that we really need to step into a lot more.
Deep, I see you have your hand up.
Um, hold on. I'm trying to get okay. My question to Lauren is, Lauren, how can we get you to cover um Black politics in Northern Virginia?
That's hard because there's not a whole lot of Black elected officials. JD Spain is up here. Uh I am not inclined to cover Adele McClure because Adele and I had it out during Justin Fairfax because she believed that Justin was guilty automatically with no evidence, which is her right to believe anything she wants, by the way. Like if y'all all believe that, that's fine. Like it's not my, I'm not, I don't have a posture of, oh my God, if you believe Justin's guilty, you're a bad person. Like you get to believe whatever you want to believe. But the way she did it when she ran for office was she kept bringing it up and it actually became a theme in her campaign. As in, I quit the lieutenant governor's office because of this thing and misrepresented what actually happened. Now that's a little different. And now you're turning it into a political thing. In fact, I remember a fundraising notice that went out at Esther Calhoun's house where it was like, she resigned from Justin in protest, and that's not what happened. Like I've seen Adele's resignation letter. That's literally not what happened. So she used the what I would define as, and again, nobody has to agree with me on this. She used the press lynching of our second black lieutenant governor as a political adventure to win elected office. So one of the reasons you don't see me covering a lot of politics in Northern Virginia is Adele McClure. All right, now I do cover JD. I don't cover Adele. Charnel is problematic. Charnel has backed the flock safety legislation that we damn sure know is going to be used to spy on black people all over the Commonwealth by the Trump administration, by the way, the lawless Trump administration. Charnel is always backing problematic legislation that has to do with justice reform. So I have kind of a rule not to bash a black elected official unless it's absolutely necessary. So you're not seeing a whole lot of reporting on those two for that reason. Again, this is not a statement of, people not having the right to believe whatever they want, but I don't think what they does do is particularly healthy, particularly good for the black community. Black Virginia News is about amplifying the black community, and anybody who's an enemy to that is probably not going to be mentioned if they're black. If they're white, they are going to be mentioned and blown up. But I don't like going out of my way to criticize black elected officials, even ones I really disagree with. Like I said, they would have to really do something hyper stupid, which has happened a few times, but it would have to really be something crazy because frankly, I think black white media does that adequately. So that's part of why you don't see a lot of coverage in Nova. Part of the reason.
Okay, well, what about if you start following our group a little bit?
Oh, I will. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I
Okay.
love this notice that Karen put in about the NAACP and in the environment, that event that's coming up. That's cool. That's great. That's fantastic. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And visiting the housing summit that we had down
Oh,
in.
that's good. Yeah, the housing summit was excellent. In fact, I tried to, if you do that again, let me know because that should be a podcast. That should be like that, all that audio that you had with the history of the housing situation for Black folks in Virginia. That is a podcast type of thing that will blow up. So I got to mic it right. It doesn't have to be mic that fancy. I just got to put the mic near you. So let me know if you do that again because that was huge. That
Okay.
was huge.
Thanks for the self-promotion, D.
Hmm. Hmm.
Alpha, you have your hand up.
So
Good.
going back to what you said about covering Northern Virginia, I think Northern Virginia is unique in that it is just from a holistic perspective, it is the economic engine of this
Right.
state. You've got some affluent Black people in Northern Virginia, and then politically, there's that influence there. And I totally agree with what you said as far as bringing us together regionally with Richmond and with the Tidewater area. But I do think that let us know what we can do to help you support or focus on or highlight Black elected officials in Northern Virginia because I heard you mention Herring and McClure, but what are your thoughts on Rosia Henson and Kenny
Oh yeah.
King and Carol
Yeah.
Foy and Maldonado and even
Yeah.
more local folks like Lusk and Bailey and Margaret Franklin? What are your thoughts from that
Yeah,
perspective?
they're all fantastic. Like, so I know Nicole Cole and Foy. Foy's already lighting it up with the right to work bill, so definitely be talking about her. I talk about her a lot. It's a report on her a lot because to me, she was kind of another version of what happens when you have an assertive African American that shows up and shows that, oh, I'm going to talk about community a lot. And then she's dissuaded from running for governor again. Yeah, she's dissuaded because she's not a toy of the establishment. So
Right.
Foy is always going to be an interesting character. And Rosia Henson, Josh, all those folks, uh, will get covered. Will absolutely get covered. That middle section of Virginia, I kind of call it Central Virginia, but it is Northern Virginia. And Sewell, there's a lot of people now in there. Because you've got Candy King, I do think is supposed to be named Secretary of the Commonwealth, although I haven't talked to her. I should probably talk to her before I blab about that. And yeah, the answer is yes. I've brought them up before, but I do have to get back on it in terms of asking them what their legislative agenda is, what they're doing, what they're feeling and anticipating for the session. And I got to get them involved in some podcasts as well. It is a great group in there and a historic group.
Are you mainly focused on the General Assembly, or like what about local? Like Keisha Evans, she's the first Black person for
Right.
Stafford County, and then
Right,
you got Prince William County Board of
right.
Supervisors. What are your thoughts on that?
Right now, I've got a reporter down there named Jamar Billingsley that is starting to cover more and more, and I got to point him in that direction. We really Black Virginia News is at the end of the day only four people, so that's part of the reason why you don't see a whole lot happening on the hyper local level. But you're right. In Suffolk, they had the same sort of thing. First Black woman elected for the Suffolk City Council just happened. Everything right. Like last year, I was like, I totally missed it. So I like miss a lot of stuff. Y'all feel free to send me stuff, particularly flyers, stuff that's happened in the community. Never get the idea in your head that it's too small. It's not too small at all. So just be sending whatever you want to send. And you're right. Yeah, you're right, Alpha. It's like there's a lot to cover. I don't generally just say, okay, I'm just going to cover the General Assembly. I tend to cover people, though, who are openly and outwardly talking a lot about things that disproportionately impact Black Virginians. So if you're that person, you're going to get covered. Generally speaking, you are. Now, I get that a lot of Black elected officials take on this persona of, we don't want to really say that we're that blackety black because we do have a lot of white constituents, blah, blah. I mean, I get some of these political strategies, but generally speaking, if you keep saying stuff that disproportionately, whether you're talking in code or not, I'm going to talk about. I'm going to usually bring you up. So that's generally what's happening. And then sometimes what's happening is I'm just missing stuff. So y'all just send, like the person you just brought up, I missed that. So yeah, just send stuff. Because believe me, we miss a lot of things, even though it's a daily. And I'm not, send away. You're not going to be sending too much. The general address is Black Virginia News at Gmail, but you can use my email as well.
You said blackvirginianews@gmail.com.
Yeah, and I'm putting that in the thing right now.
Perfect. Okay. I'm done, Russell.
Is there someone that we have not heard from? Noah, as an example. Do you have a question? Kim, do you want to ask a question? This may be your last opportunity, so weigh in.
I think everything's pretty much been covered. It was really good, and I've been taking a lot of notes, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, there's no problem. There's a lot to be said here. I mean, these subtopics of what we're talking about could be an hour-long discussion. You're gonna have an hour-long discussion on Black vending. It's incredible. So there's a lot to be said here. It's hard to cover it all because it goes back to 400 years of history, and then some of it just goes back to last year. It's we have a special burden as African Americans out there, navigating politics. There's a lot to be said.
Okay. Kim, Gloria?
Sure, I wanted to just mention that, Lauren, this is really very helpful. And I think you kind of confirmed some of what I've been seeing. I just mentioned that we put into the chat that in Stafford County, we have 4 Black females on the Board of County Supervisors, which when we moved to this area, it was not even that the case. And so I go back to your comment about really making sure that we set some legislative agenda to give to Abby because it really doesn't seem to be any set agenda from what I can tell. I know there's some areas that we certainly want to work on, and I guess I have to say that the whole SWAM piece resonates with me because as a small business owner, I see a lot of things occurring in government contracting on the state level. Say, for example, I don't think they're as attentive to the executive orders that were put out, I think, a few years ago to have more inclusiveness of SWAM vendors and contractors. And I think that's because some of the agencies are afraid to, I wonder if they're afraid to make a move on that. If they're afraid that if they show that they're fulfilling some of those areas that they may get in a bit of trouble about that with the Trump administration or whoever. So, but I'm really glad that we have Abby because what is going on in South Carolina with the introduction of the race-based contracting is, I think having an Abby would definitely impede that. I mean, I certainly hope it will, as a Democratic governor-elect. So thank
Yeah, a few things. So, one of the things that Trump is doing systematically is he's making it taboo. He's making diversity taboo. And as Congressman Scott likes to say, he's actually trying to argue that segregation is good. I mean, that's what he's really throwing us back to, because it's true. It's like that is what he's doing. But he's trying to make that taboo. And what it's doing to a lot of Black organizations, particularly the 501s, it's defunding them because there's a whole, you probably guys know that there's a strike on Target going on right now, discussions about directing Black dollars into Black business. The reason for that is because there's been a defunding of a lot of the 501 donations for a lot of these Black organizations, and that, of course, trickles down through to everybody. The question is for the Spamberger team is, are you interested in protecting the Black community against the attack by the federal government, the attack on wealth, the attack on jobs? Are you interested in that? That is the first thing to find out because if they're not interested, there's got to be another strategy. If they are interested, there has to be some thought about what legislation would help with that because there is a specific concerted attack on the money. As you can see, it's all about the money. They are funneling money. They were doing this before. They just weren't doing it as brazenly, but they're funneling the contracts, the money to their, to fucking, is it to excuse my language, Donald Trump's sons and all this other nonsense. They are taking the money out of the treasury and putting it into the bank account of the relatives and associates of Donald Trump. So the question is, how is that fought back against, not only on the state level, but you should think the fact that 4 years from now, Abigail might be running for president. What are you doing to undo that and fix that? When you guys get back into power, at some point, Democrats are going to get back into power. So, with all that said, when it comes to Black agenda items and the agenda moving forward, and don't make it too fancy. It doesn't have to be some 50-page document. You know, you see a lot of times these groups, a lot of the 501s and the other groups in other spaces, they'll put their agenda online. And I know on the federal level, they do it a lot. They'll just put an agenda up on when a new president comes in, okay, let's put our agenda out. Go look at those. They're not long, they're not huge, they're just, basic facts. We have the data to back up. That's why the Trump administration is destroying data. That's destroying the data around a lot of these things too, because they don't want, I don't know whether you guys know about the blackout report. You probably do, but I'm gonna put the link for the blackout report up. There's a group called Onyx Impact that put out a report on all the things that they are trying to destroy in the public domain. And remember, these people now have the control of the federal government, so they're controlling all the information and controlling the health data. So understand that this is the moment where asking elected officials in Virginia how they're going to protect our community, this is the moment that should be happening very loudly with no problem. So, yeah, all of that. And so think about that big time moving forward. Blackout report.
I'll use the moderator's prerogative to ask at least one more question.
Mm-hmm.
As you look at all of the folks that are going to come into the House of Delegates, especially maybe some of the Black women who won their races, do you see any potential breakout stars that are really going to shine over the next year or so?
I actually, let me look at the list. Um, it's funny. I am one of these people who tends to pay more attention to the folks who are older because the folks that are older have more power and they just know more stuff. So, there's nothing wrong with young elected officials because believe me, the party does need some new energy, but I like the old folks. I like the old five. I like it because also when they get older, they get blunter and they don't care what they tell you. So they start telling you stuff, And
That sounds like Louise Lucas.
That's Louise, yeah. So you'll say, when you see that online, you don't need me to tell you that one. But it's just, I have not really thought about that question. Now I'm looking at the list. Um, you know what? I do think that because of where he is geographically, and it might just because I've talked to him a lot, I do like Virgil Thornton, and I like Nicole Cole too, because Nicole Cole was kind of ignored by the party. They didn't put her on the list of, oh, she's gonna do this and that, and she ends up winning one of the hardest races on the entire map. And I like the fact she's a financial advisor, so we're back to money again. She's probably gonna be paying attention to that, although I haven't heard that directly from her, but I just have a good feeling. And of course, Stacey Carroll is sitting there, and Kim Taylor, I'm not Kim Taylor, the other Taylor, up there. I just think that that group is going to end up breaking out. Plus, you have to understand too, new members that are in these tougher districts, and Nicole Cole is in a tough district, and so is Stacey Carroll. They tend to get handed really key legislation. So when you think about an agenda moving forward of who you think can move something, you might want to think about those members that are in these really tough, close districts, because the party is going to be handing them gifts. You notice that Michael Fagan's down there in Virginia Beach is getting all this really cool legislation passed because he's in a really tough district. He needs those things to run again and be able to brag and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. Now, when we talk about younger members that I sort of look at, Fagan's is one of them. By the way, you guys probably saw that Elaine Luria announced that she's running for Congress again. That was supposed to be Michael Fagan's. So Luria sat in the background and didn't tell anybody that she's going to run. So nobody knew that. So DCCC and everybody else was running around the background getting Michael Fagan's ready to run in the second district. And then all of a sudden, there's an announcement by Don Scott and the gang, hey, we're going to change the redistricting. So then Luria, who told absolutely nobody about this, decides, oh, I'm going to run now. Because that's a really tough seat to run, that Kiggin seat. It's a tough seat for Democrats, always is. So that was supposed to be Michael Fagan's. Just keep that in the back of your mind, because I was sitting there, Michael Fagan's was not really wanting to do a contentious primary. I'm like, no, do a contentious primary. Like, why are you like not doing a contentious primary? So I'm a believer in primaries, but just FYI on that. And yeah, I do think there's several people coming up that'll be quite good. I do think, again, either Nicole Cole or Stacey Carroll should be doing something very interesting. And I also think Virgil Thornton, just because of where he is, he's in Hampton, and people from Hampton always are doing something interesting. So just those three. But somebody will surprise me that I have not predicted. It's going to be interesting because Don Scott's got to manage 64 people. It's not easy because you'll have people who want to do stuff that they're not going to want to do, and you may have more arguments with more Democrats, but one good thing is that they're not going to have any problem passing anything. I mean, they're going to be able to pass anything they want to pass. And also keep in mind, redistricting is going to take up a lot of time because they have to get with the members of Congress, all the Democrats, and figure out what the lines are going to be. They're not going to tell you this, by the way. Yeah, they already had one meeting, but they're not going to tell you. They are going to have to sit down and figure out what the lines are going to be. And when you talk about 10-1, I don't know whether they're joking, but knowing Don, he might not be joking. 10-1 means you are not going to have compact and contiguous. And when you talk about places like Prince William and that type of, they're going to be dividing black folks up like crazy in those congressional districts because Vindman and I would think Connolly's district, so Walkinshaw's district, is going to get divided in a very strange way if they want to make the fifth competitive or the first. So keep in mind, that's another discussion that can get very interesting because they have to divide. They're going to be looking at black voters like crazy because they know black voters 90+% of the time are going to vote Democrat. And there's only but so many people you can divide, but that's going to take a lot of work in this session. And the members, I don't care what they tell you, don't believe it. The members are deciding what the lines are. The members of Congress that you see in front of you are deciding what the lines are. So just keep all that in mind.
Great.
you know.
On that note, unless someone else has something pressing they want to ask, I think we can wind this up. All right, so that was the last call. Thank you, Lauren. Fantastic job. Thank you to everyone who participated. Very, very interesting discussion.
Yeah. Thanks a
Uh,
lot for having me.
Oh, as I stated at the outset, the Northern Virginia Democratic Black Caucus is going to hold this speaker program each month going forward. So look out for our next event and please spread the word to your friends and family about what we are doing. I really like Lauren's idea about maybe instituting some type of weekly call. We won't say we're definitely doing it yet, but it's certainly something that we should keep in mind. In addition, I implore any of you who are relatively new to this to join both your Democratic committees in your counties or in the city of Alexandria and their Black caucuses. We need you to expand the membership of these caucuses, and we in the NVDBC can certainly use your help in organizing future activities. We have discussed possible social events and community service projects, but we need additional volunteers to bring these ideas into fruition. Our email is in the chat, novademblackcaucus@gmail.com. So I hope you will join us. That brings this program to a conclusion. I wish all of you a great holiday season and take care.
Thanks.
Everyone, happy holiday. Thank you, Lauren. I will be in touch.
Thanks. Yeah, call anytime. Anybody call anytime. And yeah, great talking to you all, as usual. See most of you around. And if I haven't seen you around, that's fine too. Contact anytime, text anytime. And thanks for having me, all right?
Yeah. And I'm a
you.
faithful watcher of Roland Martin, so I see you on all the time.